So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and it's been a while actually since we've seen this map. This is of course the original version of the Mountain Pass, which, at least for me personally, was one of the first custom maps that I saw for the original Third Age, back when it was somewhat newer, and it's never really lost its luster really, because it's such a varied map in terms of the pathways you can take. This is a free-for-all as well. I think all of the factions, all of the players are playing as unified factions as well. So for example, Y2K and Team Darkstar over here are playing as Lindon, the players who sent me the battle replay today playing as Harad, so on and so forth. The thing about this one as well, from a free-for-all perspective, is based on the deployment zones that you can deploy in. Some players may have access to some really nice defensive positions. So for example, Lindon could very well have put their units up there in that peak there. But to do so may also cut yourself off from your own allies based on the deployment zones, and that can generally not be worthwhile, even if it does allow you to really dig into a really nasty defensive position. Like you can see up there, it's a few units that Baconfish has got up on that cliffside, but generally speaking, having a unified front with your allies is more important than simply digging in and hoping that your own army can withstand a huge amount of punishment and pressure. But it does look as though everyone has decided to deploy alongside one another today, and based on the setup here, Harad are going to be facing off against the Orcs of the Misty Mountains over there in perhaps more of an open battle over here, whereas in the mountains themselves you've already seen Umbar and Linden over in this section. Umbar may have their work cut out because they would have to advance into Linden when they have superior terrain, but there's no guarantee that Umbar will go after them. They could of course instead decide to go after Harad instead. This is actually a slightly modified version of this version of the Mountain Pass. You can see that this never used to be here before, and there was also not a pathway that led up around this direction as well, giving you a potential another route up to get to this area, which again is quite interesting. Umbar could take that. So there are a few little differences between this and the classic version of the Mountain Pass, but for the most part it is going to be largely the same. So, we'll go through all of the teams today. So, who is your money on? Is it going to be on Harad, who are going to be played by the Woo Raider and by his ally Madexa over there? Hashari hidden away. Harad do have access to a fair few units that can hide. Obviously, the standard Hashari are maybe not quite so terrifying as this version of the game's Rangers. Obviously, they still have their body-piercing projectiles in this version of the game. But the Hashari do have pretty nasty throwing projectiles, and when they're in melee, they are pretty good in terms of their melee defense. Their ability to deal damage to other more lightly armoured units as well is pretty substantial. They do struggle a little bit against more heavy infantry though, and if they get pinned down, enemy archers can also be a real problem for them. Serpents' Fangs. Harad don't have too much in the way of really heavy archers. The Serpents' Fangs is as good as it gets for them, and they are good. They have got a decent ability to withstand a good deal of punishment. What does set them apart slightly, what makes them a little bit unique, is of course their poison arrows, which will reduce the morale of enemy units that are getting shot by them, which does mean if Harad do start to gain the upper hand, especially against a force with lower morale just in general, like the Misty Mountains, the poison arrows can really help exacerbate a bit of a chain round, so that could be very useful. In one of the more open areas of the field as well, what will also be quite useful are the Black Serpents, one of the quickest units of multiple HP lancers that there are. They do suffer for that a little bit with regards to their survivability, at least in comparison to other similar units, but generally speaking that second hit point will still keep them alive long enough for them to do significant damage, and it is their speed of course which makes them very, very dangerous. The Mumakil are also something of a mobile powerhouse, albeit we have seen the Mumakil struggle in the past. This version of the game has been around for quite a while at this point. The Mumakil can be utterly devastating, but they are very difficult to use in that way. You need to constantly be babysitting them and force pathing them through enemy lines and such, but if you can do that, they can be very, very effective, but if you don't, they can be a monumental waste of money. They do have a ranged attack as well, but it is that's going to deal damage very, very slowly, in the same way that a depleted unit of Force Archers might. Southron Warband, a unit of basic spears that have armour piercing. It does mean that they can do a little bit more damage in comparison to the other kinds of units that you would expect to find in this price bracket, but as with most things in the lower levels of the Harad roster, their own survivability is certainly in question. They do have a shield, but their armour and just generally their stats are not going to be able to withstand some of the more high quality units that we will find elsewhere. Muhard Beast Hunters are here. Javelins, of course, is something that Harad are very well known for. This kind of armour-piercing tool will be useful against all of the factions today, even if they come up against Lindon. The Noldorin units, the sort of thing which Harad's armour-piercing can really help deal with. But for the most part, I imagine that we're going to be seeing them utilised against the Misty Mountains a little bit earlier. Southron Pikemen, similar story with the Warband really. They're a unit of pikes. They're one of only 2 pikes in the game that have armour piercing. The other one I would consider to be the best unit of pikes that there is. This one certainly not, because their stats are so low that they can't actually live up to the armour piercing that they have, and many times we've seen them crumble in the face of pressure. But if you can support them properly, that armour piercing can make a big difference. And then in behind we've got several units of these Muhard warriors, a more numerous but more lightly armoured unit of line infantry that Harad have at their disposal. This is the sort of unit that you will bring, similar to something like the Rudar Swordsman, for example, if you want to go for a numbers-focused approach. Decent damage for what they are, but like I said, they're relatively easy to kill. They've got decent shields, but as soon as they get involved in melee with something superior to themselves, or get hit from the rear with archers, they're going to melt away very quickly. Same story with the Muhard Berserkers, though, of course, they trade in that shield for even more offense with an armour-piercing two-hander, though, of course, the lack of that shield makes them incredibly vulnerable, and their own melee defense is also pretty damn low. Interesting to see the omission of Trollmen, which is actually somewhat refreshing, a more numerous army this. Medexa, meanwhile, has also got Muhard warriors. Demons of the Desert are here, so this is the first Trollmen class unit that we've seen. Very, very deadly javelins. In terms of damage dealing, they're probably the best javelin unit in the game. But they are a little bit worse in melee than the other multiple HP javelins that you'll see throughout the game, and everyone knows the threat that they pose, so they do have a tendency to get focused down by other ranged units. Southron archers positioning themselves just so on the hill to meet any sort of advance that the goblins may engage in. Some upgraded dismounted Serpent Guard, they will find themselves in a pretty happy place against most forces. I think Umbar they would match up relatively poorly against, but against, honestly, the mainline units from Lindon and certainly against the goblins, the dismounted Serpent Guard with their focuses should be pretty darn good. Some Trollmen of Harad just in behind there. No surprise to see them in some capacity on Team Harad today. The armour piercing that they have and just the damage they can cause is too good not to bring in most situations. We've already seen the Beast Hunts in the other army, as have the Moonakill already been covered, and another unit of Serpents Fangs as well. So let's see what the Misty Mountains have to offer. DF Mark and Filler. It looks as though is this only a portion of their army? It's possible they've decided to split their strength, which may be a bit of a mistake. Snow Trolls are here. They are a little bit stronger in melee over a longer period of time than the Cave Trolls that they're stood next to. But what really sets them apart compared to Trolls from other factions is their speed. They can cover ground very, very quickly. It means if cavalry is trying to escape from them, it's kind of difficult to do. They are still vulnerable to being charged by cavalry though, so a bit of a weird set of strengths and weaknesses the Snow Trolls have compared to other Trolls. The Cave Trolls, weaker in melee like I said, but their denser formation does mean that they can crack through defensive lines more easily. They can cause quite a lot of chaos. They're not quite as reliable at being a line buster like that in comparison to the Great Shield units like the Blackguard Barrister and the Blackwatch Legion, but they still do a good enough job there. More Cave Trolls. The Drake Broodlings can be a very weird kind of unit. They can be utterly devastating if you keep them moving. If you get them caught on units that have bonuses against them, they can melt away very quickly. So they're a real boom or bust kind of unit. And there's 2 of them. DF Mark's army is actually very bizarre. This might be the entirety of the Misty Mountains force actually. It's just that they've gone for a very weird army. Headed up by some Bolgs champions, which are a very good anti-cavalry cavalry unit. They are also very good at charging into the enemy, to be fair. They are a little bit more versatile perhaps than the champions of the White Hand and the Melkor's Chosen, but it is also worth bearing in mind that at the end of the day they're not going to be quite as good at as those 2 units in cavalry hunting. And then we have Filler, who has got some mountain heroic hosts. They're quite similar to the heroic infantry from Isengard in terms of what they offer. A really decent, fairly expensive but very well armoured frontline infantry unit that's also capable of dealing damage. Heavy Goblin Archers going to be able to offer some support as well. Heavy Goblin Spears, very similar to the Southron Warband. They've got armour piercing, but their baseline stats maybe won't live up to what you might want from them. And then the Goblin King's Bodyguard, which are a very dependable unit to put your general in, and That's exactly what Phil has done here. We've already talked about cave trolls. Warg skirmishers though as well, so a unit of faster moving javelins is always going to be useful for helping to keep things bottled up. Now then, moving on to Lindon, starting off with Y2K, who's got most of his army pointing this way, so I think they're expecting to have to deal with Umbar first and foremost. Lindon, obviously the elves are going to be a little bit more about quality. Mithlond, Pikeman and Harad and Guard here, so some archers in behind, some decent pikes. Lindon capable of fielding more pikes than any other elven faction. They don't have the really high-end pikes that Lothlorien or Imladris do, but the numbers of pikes can be a very important factor as well. Mithlond Marines offer good javelin damage, combined with them being quite useful in melee as well. The whole sort of Ulmo are in there, which are a devastating unit of Lance Knights. They don't have a shield, nor the armour that several other units of Knights do have access to, but very damaging, very quick as well. Harlinden Riders have got their bows and also their spears as well, so pretty multifaceted unit of horse archers. They are still single HP cavalry though, so they do need to stick close to the horse lords of Ulmo if they want to be effective in that regard. We've got the Noldorin Guard. We've already mentioned briefly when talking about armour that this is what Lindon have to offer. Very, very strong unit of line infantry this, and can really help tie your force together as Lindon, given the fact that most of your other units are quite lightly armoured. 4 Linden Marines are in here, kind of similar to the Mithlond Marines, only they have a spear in melee instead of a sword. We've got the Mithlond Nobles, Chariots. Chariots are another boom or bust kind of unit, maybe a little bit easier to use than the Mumakil in some respects, and also the javelins the Mithlond Nobles throw, while not large in terms of volume, will do a lot of damage. You need to keep them moving though. Micro is absolutely vital for them. More 4 Linden Marines. Moving on to Team Darkstar. He has also got some pikes, albeit the slightly lower end of 4 Linden Pikemen, but they will still do a job on the front line, holding things in place. More Harlinden Guard, more Harlinden Guard. 4 Linden Archers as well, and 4 Linden Marines. So plenty of ranged units in behind the initial pike line here. Plenty of javelins and archers. We've already talked about the Harlinden Riders with their bows and spears. The Mithlond Lancers are a different kind of unit. They might look quite similar, but they've got javelins instead of bows, and then also they don't have an anti-cavalry bonus, they have a better charge bonus instead, so once they're out of javelins, they're more designed for charging into infantry rather than engaging other cavalry. So 2 different takes really on a ranged cavalry, melee cavalry kind of hybrid thing. Noldorin Guard and Noldorin Blade Masters, obviously the 2-handed swords, devastating on this. And then a couple more units. There's Harlinden Infantry, Mithlond Marines, and that's just about it. So last but by no means least, we have the Black Numenorians from Umbar, starting off with Froggy. He's got some Belagai footmen out here in front. Umbar, I think, are the ones with a clear choice to make. They can either try and go after Lindon, or, like I said, they can maybe try and pursue Harad, or take the long way around by taking the mountain path. Alcarondas Legion, a fantastic unit of line infantry. There's always been a big fan of them. They combine really good armour values, very high morale, with good killing power as well. So they should be pretty good as far as a core to their army in this battle. Belagai footmen and more Alcarondas Legion, so 2 waves of the same unit. Belagai are archers and Narin are a Royal Guard. 2 ends of the spectrum in terms of overall quality that Umbar have to offer, but both of them designed to do the same thing, which is to win skirmish fights with enemy archers. The rest of the force, I mean, there's more Belagai archers. There is this pathway that leads up here as well. Balaketh Marksman, again, the middle tier option for that in many ways, with an armour upgrade as well. We have a catapult, which it's going to take a little while for them to wheel that into a position that it can actually be utilised in, but it could be utterly devastating. And finally, Baconfish, he's got some Corsair Blackguards, so some javelins, some Corsair infantry, which are more disposable archers, and then they can be light infantry in melee, but they're not going to win many fights in either respect, but they offer you a little bit more in terms of numbers than you would otherwise get from an expensive faction like Umbar. Warlords are here as well, Balaketh Shield Bearers, and then looking over here, Belagai archers, some Alcarondas Legion, and there's a few Narin Royal Guard. I'm just looking for anything different. Balaketh Shield Bearers are different. They don't have quite the same stats as the Alcarondas Legion. I think they've got a bigger shield value, but that's about it. Even with the armour upgrade, their defensive abilities are not quite on the same level. They do have armour piercing, but that comes with all the potential strengths and weaknesses that you would expect from that. So, without further ado, I think we will get the show on the road. I don't know if there's much. There'll probably be a small cut, because I don't know exactly who's going to make the first move here, and it might take them a little while to make up their mind. So I will make a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle is about to get underway. So with a couple of volleys here and there, really quite the bizarre start to this battle this could be with the Misty Mountains. With their very odd composition, I'm not sure what exactly they're going to be able to do here because they have no way into the mountain pass other than the position that Harad have already significantly fortified. They may have to engage in a bit of diplomacy with Umbar or Lindon to try and put some pressure on Harad from the other angle, I think. Otherwise, I'm not really sure where they're going to be going. They've brought so many of these monstrous units, which is fine, but they don't really have anything else to secure a position once the monstrous units have engaged and started to do a lot of damage. And this is really the sum total of their infantry, which is very rare to see the Misty Mountains with such a small army. Again, perhaps this is just a further result of the rather bizarre composition they have brought. You can see here that the Warg Skirmish is getting hit by the archers from the Moonkill actually. And now, the Black Serpents, which this isn't without its risk, and you can see that the trolls actually maybe targeted the wrong troll unit there. Black Serpents getting almost completely enveloped there by the cave trolls, but if they had charged into the unit that eventually ended up sideswiping them, I do feel as though the cave trolls would have been skewered really badly there, but as a result of that rather weird decision to go after the other unit of trolls, many of the riders also fell by the wayside as well. A few trolls dead, but more of the Harad cavalry taking a beating there than they would have liked to have seen. Great broodlings making their way up the hill. Surely they're not going to charge in already without any help. Still the Harad archers are the things that are just whittling down the Misty Mountains forces. I mean, is there a gap that could be exploited here? The problem is there's nothing that the Drake broodlings are clearing the way for. They may very well end up doing a bit of damage here, but a bit of damage is as far as this is going to go. They can retreat fairly easily. It's actually the Lindon horse archers that are coming to the Misty Mountains aid here, weirdly enough. With the Linden riders able to circumvent the potential Umbar problem. Now they're going to be doing a little bit of damage, but Serpent's Fangs hitting them with poison arrows in return. Southron Warband chasing them down in melee just to effectively shoo them off. It's a significant amount of Linden Cavalry though that has decided to come down here to aid the Misty. I mean, to be fair, if I were the other players, I would actually feel like aiding the Misty Mountains as well, because I feel like they've shot themselves in the foot massively with their composition. So helping them to be as effective as possible against Harad, who are more likely to be a threat to your chance of victory in the late game, is the way to go, I would suggest. Harad also have a superior position here, able to fortify from both angles, really. This Linden Cavalry isn't going to be too much of a problem, you would imagine. And yeah, I mean, Umbar are on their way down here now. There's no way that players are going to be attacking into Umbar when they're in that position. Unless everyone clubs together and decides to go after Umbar specifically. Lindon themselves are not too eager on committing their infantry just yet, although 4 Linden scouts could decide to make their way through the higher areas of the mountain pass to start pressurising Harad as well from this angle. Yeah. In comes the Goblin Infantry, but again, I really don't know what this is going to achieve. The Goblin Infantry are almost certainly going to rout very, very quickly. There's no support here for them, and the entire Harad army lies in front of them. Fleeing is the only thing that's going to be in the Goblin Infantry's future. Forward come the Cave Trolls, Snow Trolls. Yeah, the Goblin Infantry rout so quickly before the Trolls even arrive. Heavy Goblin Spears are on the way forward. I mean, this is where the Trolls, to be fair, will do damage to a lot of the weaker Haradran units, but they're going to get burnt down too quickly. Especially with the armour piercing that Harad can offer here and there. I mean, the Southron Pikeman, to be fair, will get savaged by the Trolls. In come the Moomakill. Bit of a clash of the Titans here, with the Moomakill going up against the Trolls. This is actually a situation in which the Moomakill will probably die off pretty quickly. The Trolls are capable of dealing a lot of damage very fast, and the Moomakill are unlikely to be able to withstand that sort of punishment. The Moomakill count as cavalry as well, and the only infantry that the Goblins really have. are their spears, so that's also going to do a little bit of extra damage. As scary as this may be, and as much damage is being dealt very quickly here, I really don't think Harad needs to be too concerned about the direction in which this fight is going. All they need to do is weather the storm a little bit. I'm surprised that Moonkill isn't running amok, actually, given all the death that's occurring. Great broodlings going to be combining their strength once again to try and bring down these black serpents. Certainly appears very genius in this battle. There is one of the attacking generals just sort of hanging out at the back as part of the Goblin King's bodyguard. So far, actually, at least in part, Harad can't afford to be too stingy in what they're committing to the front line. They need numbers. Overwhelming them is definitely the way to go. Linden scouts are choosing now to activate themselves, now that Harad have got their attention elsewhere as a result of the Misty Mountains assaults. The Linden scouts are going to charge in here and try and chip away at the strength of some of these Muhad warrior units that they've got in reserve, which is fair enough. All of these archers are still going to be... Yeah.
See how their general turns tail and flees like a whipped dog.
No admission of defeat there, though. So that's just the army's morale collapsing. I have to say, I'm not terribly surprised by that. Again, the competition was very bizarre, and the tactics were very aggressive. Not that I'm complaining too much about that, but still. Corsair infantry and Balagaya footmen taking some javelin hits from the Linden Marines, who in return have had good arrow fire provided their way. First melee engagement here between Umbar and Lindon. Corsair infantry definitely not going to be the answer for the level of quality that Lindon can provide, even with their javelins. They're capable of looking after themselves just fine in melee. Linden Guard will be firing in, and when it comes to archer versus archer combat, Umbar should have the edge. They've got a far better setup for this sort of thing with their heavier archers. Linden are capable of probably doing more damage on average, but the discrepancy in the defensive values between the two groups is very substantial. The artillery on high, Linden Guard moving forwards. So far the artillery falling well short of the mark. Noldorin Guard moving in and causing the immediate routing of the Corsairs. What's going on here? Goblins trying to, I guess, feed on the scraps of these Harad units that are simply chasing the enemy down. The Wargs trying to go after this unit of Muhad Berserkers as they continue to chase the Goblin King's bodyguard and try and ensure that they cannot return. This is alarming. Was there an admission of defeat that I was just too blind to see? Because that seems like an awful lot to go in a chain round, but also certainly not impossible. In come the Bolg's champions from DF Mark, trying to again just chip away at Harad's numbers, give them a harder job in the later game. Harad, of course, have now got a choice to make when they move forward. Do they go after Umbar, Lindon, or try and hit both at once? For now, they've got the excuse, for lack of a better term, they can simply go after the scraps of the Misty Mountains and whatever Lindon have decided to send here. There's the other Misty Mountains general. Linden riders are up here. Shooting a few arrows downhill into what they can reach for the Harad army. Harad have still got a decent force left, a very decent force left, as you can see. Still presumably have got some decent ammunition on the Demons of the Desert as well. Bolg's champions maybe going completely unnoticed, and they do have an anti-cavalry bonus as well, which should come in quite handy against the Bolg's champions, although the melee attacks from the Munakill are devastating. It's just getting them to do that melee attack which is often the problem. The Bolg's champions are out as a result of being in Munakill, and the champions are now grown. Poison projectiles coming in as well. So what's left of the Misty Mountains army still trying to play with the scraps of Harad as they are there. That's going to be it. Now, what will Harad do? I mean, they could try and go up onto the high ground and attack Lindon from the rear. If they go through this valley, it means that they're going to have to deal with the new terrain features that are over here. And also, the choice will be largely made for them. They will have to go after Umbar. Footmen taking a charge from all sorts of all moment. It's uphill. They are spearmen, so they'll be better placed for dealing with that than most. Decent amount of Umbar skirmishes over here. Something of an attack going on from Lindon. I'm surprised those Umbar archers are not going after this group here. They've got, of course, their fencers doing some decent damage to the Northern Guard, but Lindon are struggling a little bit here. They've got the quality on the front line, but not the numbers. Umbar able to commit their own strong units as well. And in most circumstances, the Elves are going to be able to rely on a huge quality gap. It's not really the case against Umbar. Lindon should still have better quality when it comes down to it. Northern Guard on an individual basis are stronger than the Alpha and Best Legion, but the shape of the engagement, the numbers that are involved, Umbar will be gaining the upper hand here. So Lindon needs to be careful. The Elves also in this situation, once they start getting into a death spiral, it can be a little bit harder to recover from because you've got less disposable manpower. Going after the 4 Lindon Marines in the very distance here. The Catapult is in an intimidating position. I do think that where this engagement has fallen is better for Umbar than it is for Lindon. The Linden Cavalry is doing its best, but again it's in a rather narrow position that it's trying to do its work here, and they're also under arrow fire. Which for Lindon only increases the negativity of the situation. The Marines on the way forward. Javelins could be the answer, but this front line is already looking a bit thin on the ground. Not the best angle for those javelins either. See, the Northern Guard are in real danger here of being overwhelmed. Spencer's still in the background as we have a little bit over on the other side. What very, very little remains of the Misty Mountains are going to be regrouping where this front line used to be. Harad are going to go this way. So this does mean that Lindon will be finding themselves in the firing line more so than Umbar, and perhaps revenge is what motivates Harad. The harassment they've received at the hands of the Linden Cavalry has not been terribly devastating to them. That was actually one of the better charges we've seen so far from the 4 Linden Scouts, doing good damage to single-hard warriors, but maybe the damage they've already decided to inflict upon Harad is now going to come back to haunt them, because I don't really know if they've got anywhere to go. They can try and go up there, perhaps, retreat their army and then go up there, and then it'll be like a Mexican standoff around the low ground. One thing for sure, if Lindon stay where they are, they're going to get squashed between Umbar and Harad. Mumakil going to go this way, perhaps. Mumakil could even turn around and finish off the Misty Mountains once and for all. But this is where the main engagement is. Thus far, a decent amount of damage being inflicted. Defeat is almost a certainty, defeat is a distinct possibility. Even with Elven reinforcements here, it's not going too well. The Northern Guard have been fully overwhelmed, the fencers have committed themselves to melee as well. They'll do pretty well against Lindon as well, actually, in melee. High damage, high defense skill units, these are the sorts of things which can go toe-to-toe with the Elves. Heavy armour also does help against the Elves a lot, because they tend to lack a bit of armour piercing, especially in melee for Lindon. So a lot of these armour upgraded Umbar units will last significantly longer. Horse Lords help them though. They've done the Mumakil now, they have taken the high road. The question is, what are they actually going to go after? They've got a choice here. They could go after the artillery. Looks like the artillery crew has left the area. Those Balaketh marksmen getting run down. Lots of damage being done. All sorts of Ulmo charging into the back of the Balagai footmen over here. And this is maybe an area where Umbar have done not quite as well. Harland and Guard. Lancers are there. Mumakil getting right into the thick of things. They're now a split unit for the most part, and the Mumakil bodies, of course, being solid entities, is going to affect this engagement. It's going to get in the way of both sides, although Umbar will be less appreciative of that, seeing as they're the ones with the momentum in that little area. Here come Harad now. So what will Lindon do? They are now effectively trapped between both forces of evil men. The Elven war cries continue to sound continuously. Marksman getting hit by the horse of Umbar as well. Kill leaving, so I can only assume he's running amok. He's actually routing. The elves are continuing to try and use what missiles they have left, Linden riders. You'll see again how slowly damaged Lindon are becoming. They don't have that same staying power as a result of their lighter armour in general. Sort of almost still represent a huge threat if they're able to get into the right positions to charge into the backs of some Umbar units, like over here. These may be spears, but it's still a good opportunity to get your lances down. Unfortunately, that was not a charge, that was a bump. When cavalry refuses to get its lance down, that's always a problem. All of these are Noldoran units as well, which are going to be far too strong for Naru Royal Guard. What's going on up here? Still just the Balagai archers, which is still a fair ways off. I thought it was Elven archers up on the hill for a second, but no. The support's still coming in from Umbar. Noldoran able to withstand a little better, perhaps. The massive Harad army now arriving on the scene as well, so Lindon. Their days now surely are numbered. I think the victor is going to be one of Harad and Umbar. It just depends on who was able to win out more convincingly. You'd have to say Harad must be heavy favourites going into the late game, because surely they will have dealt with the Misty Mountains more efficiently than Umbar so far have been dealing with Lindon. That has to be the assumption. Lancers moving forwards. There's still some really scary units as well, like Champions of Nathra, which are still going to be completely healthy. I don't know if the Demons of the Desert have got much ammunition left, but we didn't see them get used against the Misty Mountains, nor should they have been. There was no need. Victory was always likely to be theirs. All sorts of Ulmo are leaving the area. Linden Guard using what missiles they can. Linden Javelins coming in from the side and doing a good job at helping to devastate those Naru Royal Guard. Linden Guard doing the same. Yeah, the Umbar warlords are still up. As much as they're in a better position than Lindon are. I think the situation is such now that if either one of them wants to be victorious, Umbar and Lindon should maybe start thinking about ganging up on Harad. This kind of awareness of what went on in the battle earlier on, where the Misty Mountains weren't really able to impress themselves on Harad at all, should be starting to ring alarm bells in the heads of the Lindon and Umbar players at this point. Still some Misty Mountains forces over here, including the Volks champions, which, to be fair, I mean, if the Misty Mountains were to win from here, that would be remarkable. Even if they don't, I mean, with stuff like Drake Broodlings and Volks champions, they still have the ability to do a decent amount of damage. Unfortunately, however, it won't be to Harad, because Harad's infantry is behind all of Umbar and Lindon's there. Much of it may have come down to random chance, but things have been really falling in Harad's favour so far. Dismounted Serpent Guard moving in. Like I said, compared to most line infantry units from human kingdoms, Dismounted Serpent Guard will actually trade better with elves than most. They've got the kind of focuses that make them more dangerous against elf infantry, a bit more of a focus on damage and melee defense stats-wise than on their equipment, and they do have the armor upgrade anyway. This armor piercing may not be at its most efficient against Lindon, but it's still going to be, I mean, they're still so scary. They'll be able to rip those Mithlon lances apart
Curse the
in
sun
melee.
that shines on our disgrace. Just win the battle.
I wouldn't be so sure about that
Precious
announcer.
instead of victory.
The announcer's opinions go out the window completely in a free-for-all, really. Linden Guard getting completely overwhelmed by the Ruhard horde. Further down, Linden archers on the march. Rondas Legion and the rest of the Umbar forces securing their position, but they're having to go up against the Noldorin, which means they've got an even harder job than Harad, who are crushing through the dregs of what was the rear guard of the Linden army. I mean, Linden are finished at this point. And with that, I think, Umbar have got a little bit more left in the tank that they can commit. I don't know whether it's going to be enough to meet the full fury of Harad at this point. A few too many out of ammunition archers.
Cut off the serpent's head.
Well, they're going to be reliant on the Linden general force. The elves have got very good morale, but it's not unbreakable. Dealing with the enemy as efficiently as possible is going to be important for Harad from now. Poison arrows will only exacerbate the problem. Fall Linden scouts have been a consistent problem for Harad, in all fairness. For a unit of very cheap single HP cavalry, which this variant of the game doesn't really do any favours to, they've actually been used pretty well by Team Darkstar. They will continue to charge it, continue to try to whittle down Harad. At this point it may be... it's a case of, especially for the Misty Mountains and Linden at this point, a case of being kingmakers. Do they want to hasten Harad's victory, or do they want to give Umbar a fighting chance by continuing to whittle Harad down like this? Harad's main army continues to move forward, and they are now engaging in large parts with Umbar, which is where units like the Rondas Legion will be helpful. Most of the Harad units you see here, even though they're lower tier, are going to be armor piercing, so they will be able to punch above their weight. They've still got those new hard beast hunters as well. The Demons of the Desert are worryingly in range, and that's going to absolutely devastate that Umbar front line. And the Hashari coming in. It would have been a fairly even fight between quantity and armor piercing and then quality and defensive prowess, but between the Demons of the Desert and the Hashari volleys, that has done a lot of damage to Umbar now. The Demons of the Desert continuing to do so. I think that kind of damage is the sort of thing which is going to put this battle beyond anyone else. Lindon are gone, which means all of these Harad units can also now lurch forward and join in the assault, still leaving beast hunters that can be committed as well. Lindon are running. Now are the Volks champions, and what are they going to do? They want to claim some vengeance on Harad. They're running out of time to do so. The Warlords of Umbar are there. They can charge in and cycle charge with the Demons of the Desert. They've got to be careful, because staying close to them means they're just going to get hit by the javelin. Staying in melee with them, the Demons of the Desert do count as spearmen. So that could be a real problem. Did that count as a charge? I think it did, actually. They got their lances down, yeah, it must have, because that was a fair amount of damage that they inflicted, but that will be the end for the Warlords. That will be their last hurrah. Yeah, like, the charging in Medieval 2 can be so weird like that sometimes. You can have a massive run up and then your cavalry will just refuse to charge properly and just bump into the enemy with their swords drawn, or they can be practically on top of the enemy unit you get them to charge into, and then they'll magically make it up to charge speed within a couple of feet. Unfortunately for Umbar, it was the latter this time around. Beast Hunters. Also an armor-piercing unit, so again, the sort of thing which Umbar can deal with on an individual basis rather easily. All this armor-piercing is going to apply. Going to have to deal with these Black Numenorian units to the last man, however. Given Umbar's more locked morale nature, but surely, from here on, the only victor in this fight can be Harad. There's still over 10,000 frames left to go in this free-for-all, so maybe the dregs of all the other teams can combine together to try and make a fist of this going into the rest of the fight. Some ammunition though as well, Harad. Serpents' Fangs. Balagar Archers trying to overwhelm them, but for the time being the Serpents' Fangs, there's still 93 of them left. So they may be slightly obscured by the Mumakill Corps, but they're still going to be just fine against a unit of Balagar Archers, you would imagine. Also we got still some Beast Hunters. Whatever happens to the Bolgs Champions? They flee into the hills. They're taking the long way around. What is this? It's a star. This must be a fleeing general. It is, and it is actually the general unit. Kierdan runs, leaving the countless dead behind him. Pikeman still doing their thing. Most of those will be hitting the dead carcass of the Mumakill there. A little bit of a reprieve. Umbar, Balakith's shield bearers trying to hold back the tide. Unfortunately for them, however, their own armour piercing is not really going to be too useful against Trollman and Moonhearts. And the armour piercing damage they're taking in return will be very effective from Harad, and indeed there go the Balakith. The mid-tier of Umbar do not gain access to the locked morale traits that the high tiers do. Some fences moving forward, then Pikeman are routed. Also Blackguards still trying to do the business. I mean, Harad have taken damage as this battle has worn on, but they still have too much left in the tank for Umbar, surely. Given the kinds of units we're talking about. Some Ashari Shadows are here, revealing themselves. I mean, this is surely only going to hammer this battle home. Teams of the desert are in close proximity to this little skirmish as well. Body-piercing projectiles. I still want to know what happened to those Bolgs Champions. Were they cut down at some point? Were they chased by the Ashari Shadows and shot? Because I don't think they... I mean, they certainly didn't charge in where we were looking. And that would surely be the only use.
Drive them from the battle.
Like a herd of goats. I think that might be Baconfish's army then. Nope, Baconfish is still here. Castamere himself, surrounded by, at one point, what would have been his underlings. Harad throwing off the Black Numenorian yoke here though. Before we come more Corsair Blackguards. And also here come more Trollmen. Devastating unit. And there he goes. Killed by one of the champions of Natharat. Shadows, why is there still so many frames left? Another force that has revealed itself? Yes. This makes maybe a little bit more sense, but nothing of snow trolls, blackbacks, and mouse like berserkers. I mean, this is all well and good, but I don't think it's substantial enough. I mean, a free-for-all can be defined by units that are hidden, being revealed later on. We're going to have to go up to time 60s, I think, before this battle is joined once more. It's not a bad gambit. I mean, it's sort of the classic way to play a free-for-all. Like I said, leave at least 1 or 2 units, in this case 4, to try and win you the battle late on, having effectively gone into a battle you know you were going to lose. But I think the Misty Mountains lent too heavily on losing that initial battle. Purely because they lost it too hard, I think. If they'd have maybe given a little bit more attention to the initial assault they were giving Harad, so they could do a little bit more damage to the South Trolls, then things would be a little bit different, I think. And that sort of force would have been quite scary. But also its armor piercing focus, maybe not the most efficient thing against Harad. The Blackbacks are very dangerous though. If they do win this battle, it'll be on the backs of them. Gotta be very careful here, Dex. The Snow Trolls are fast, and he's gonna get caught here. Flying too close to the sun. This is one of the things, like I said at the start, it's something that you rarely see used to full effect, or be as useful as the traits that other trolls have, that speed to help catch cavalry. But that's exactly what you want to be seeing.
We will taste ashes instead of victory.
I still want to know where the announcer is getting this from, to be honest. This force that has revealed itself is surely not substantial enough. Taking hits from the mounted rangers, and we're whittling down those mounted orcs. They will want to go after the Blackbacks, but there was another unit that was revealed there as well, so 3 mountain orc berserker units. Again, dangerous, damaging, but more so against heavily armoured units. Not the sort of thing that Harad usually traffics in. Again, I think we still need to go to at least times 2 speed, probably even times 6 if we're being honest. It's going to take quite a while before the melee engagement happens. Harad have dug in. I mean, this is all of what Harad has left. I mean, it's not huge, is it? Now that you consider it, they have had to go through that weird first assault from the Misty Mountains, through Lindon, through Umbar, so it has taken its toll overall. How much ammunition do they have left as well? So maybe the Misty Mountains will be. Are they really going to take this long way around? I'm not sure splitting their forces is the right thing to do necessarily. But we'll see. There's not really much else I can say at this point. Under normal circumstances, I think I'd make a cut, but considering how swift this last fight is likely to be, I don't think there's too much need for that. The shield bearers are still routing, so Umbar I think are fully gone, as are Lindon, which means we're back. Harad have to face their first enemy once more to try and claim the crown. Blaring. Snow Trolls able to get some practice against some South Trolls, hopefully. Obviously the addition of the Trolls makes this somewhat interesting because it's a lot of damage that can be done very, very quickly. 2 units of them. Poison arrows. You're definitely better off going after these kinds of units. You can go after the Blackbacks, and even if you miss, you're going to hit some mountain orc berserkers and likely get some good kills. Poison arrows are also the sort of thing which, well, to be fair actually, the Blackbacks and the mountain orc berserker as a berserker unit has locked morale, so this is actually just a thing that really helps shift the battle as well. One of the very few Misty Mountains units which has locked morale, and not for a great deal of money either. So they're not going to rout in the face of any Harad pressure, so this is where the poison arrows actually will prove to be somewhat useless. Berserkers and a couple of Snow Trolls. Engagement begins. Will Harad have what it takes? A decent amount of Trollman, Serpents, Fangs will be a good unit for this. A lot of the lower tier units, however, are going to get savaged by the Trolls, and it was actually, intentionally or no, a good part of the line to actually permit the Snow Trolls to there. Arrow fire still coming in behind these thunders. This is worrying. Berserkers overlapping the lines. The Shari Shadows are going to try and shoot body-piercing projectiles in here. So Harad will need that support if they are to be victorious. Don't know though. There's a lot of units that are starting to rout off the pressure from the trolls. This might be a little bit too much for Harad to deal with. They're going to be dependent on those Hashari shadows very hard. Seems certain, victory seems certain. Tooltip going all over the place. Raiders General. I mean, the Trollmen are unlikely to run in this situation, but see, there is still a decent amount of the Trollmen though. Blackback Mountain Berserkers are taking losses. The other unit of Serpents Fangs getting into melee will be enough to continue the fight for the time being. Shari Shadows, if they're out of ammunition and being used as makeshift shock cavalry, is the only thing left to them. Trolls, still in decent shape actually. The Snow Trolls proved to be maybe a little bit more resilient than I thought they might have been. Maybe they have done enough here to weather the storm. A small amount of damage that the Hashari Shadows and the Serpents Fangs were able to do may have been enough to help tip the balance in Harad's favour here in the late game. Hashari Shadows, not really enough room to get really devastating charges off, but it's certainly better than nothing. Saving grace for the Misty Mountains, like I said, is the locked morale nature of the units that they are now utilising. So they will stand and fight to the bitter end. Harad will need to kill them to the last. Troll slash goblin slash orc. I think. Very hard to know. I mean, the Serpents Fangs two-hander unit, decently damaging in melee. The Snow Trolls really do start to collapse. Something else though is that Harad need these Trollmen to stay alive, otherwise it's going to be all over for them. Very close still. Continuous cycle charging from the Hashari Shadows. Again, it's far less effective than other cavalry that the Beggars Camp chooses at this stage in a fight. It's rare that this close to the end I'm still not fully confident of who's going to win. I still think it'll be the Misty Mountains, but sure. Those Snow Trolls have been very important here in the late game. They may not be as tanky as something like the Olag High, but they've definitely been able to withstand a bit of a beating here, and the damage that they've chucked out surely has been important as well.
We must look to our own men now.
That's the only one remaining. That is going to be that. I mean, the sum total of survivors is what you see in front of you. Not much, but in the end, the classic sequestering units away for the late game has worked. They're quite fortunate, I think, the Misty Mountains in that regard, that did work, because under normal circumstances you need to do more damage to your initial opponent.
And remember, an army of sheep led by a lion can defeat an army of lions led by a sheep.
How poetic. But yes, victory for the Misty Mountains. It looked very unlikely early on, but maybe the gambit was always there to appear like it was a suicidal advance, and then to go on to be victorious. You can see here that DF marked with a very unconventional army of only 170, so only cavalry and monstrous units were involved for him. Filler with a few more units of infantry, and that was, even with the rather unorthodox compositions, this was still one of the larger armies on the field, so that is worth bearing in mind as well. Very bizarre, but that's what we like to see, something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, even though having units hidden until the late game in a free-for-all is definitely not out of the ordinary. The way that this one went in terms of its ebb and flow was a little bit peculiar, and that can only be a good thing. More of a conventional fight between Lindon and Umbar. I think even if Harad hadn't arrived, I still think Umbar were going to win that fight. Lindon, where they chose to engage, probably wasn't the best, and Umbar's archers were taking advantage of that. Umbar's infantry is strong enough to withstand the elven quality that Lindon have, so even if it weren't for the arrival of Harad, I think Umbar would have won, but Umbar, of course, were not winning that fight as much as Harad won their initial engagement against the decoy force from the Misty Mountains. So Harad were also then able to defeat Umbar when all was said and done. But the Misty Mountains, I guess you have to say the battle went as planned for them. That can only be what they were intending from the beginning. And yeah, so Harad, they fought and defeated at one point or another every other army on the field, and yet in spite of that they still end up with the overall defeat being theirs, which is kind of unfortunate from their perspective, but that's how free-for-all is. You know, you don't win based on style or how brave you were in your engagements. You win based on your army still being standing in any capacity at the end, and that was the goblins on this occasion. So what did the damage for Harad then? Plenty of damage. I mean, they had a very varied force that they were fighting in this battle. Champions of Nafrat, Serpents, Fangs, all of these units doing quite well. Demons of the Desert with 275 kills, obviously, ripping through the force from Umbar when they were utilised. The Trollmen doing okay, one of them getting under 100 kills though, which in this sort of situation maybe isn't what you want to be seeing. Southron Archers doing quite well early on against the Misty Mountains. Shari Shadows were one of the units which we saw even into the late game, trying their best to salvage things for Harad, but not quite enough in the end. As for the Wound Raiders army, a more unorthodox force with no Trollman, plenty of Muhards and Southrons however, so more of an even spread of kills this, but with a couple of standouts. The Mumakil getting 237 is quite an impressive return. Serpent's Fangs were just over 100, but yeah, it goes to show that that's decent use of the Mumakil. In this army here, 82 is less impressive, but then also fairly par for the course. Mumakil can be difficult to use. 237 though is very good from the Wound Raiders, so he'll be pleased with that. May not have been enough to gain ultimate victory for Harad in the end. I'm sure that for most people they will have won the moral victory in this battle, but free-for-alls be like this. You know, they've got to be you've got to be a little bit more savvy, a little bit more dishonourable perhaps if you want to win in a free-for-all, and hidden units are one of the best ways you can do that. So well played to the Misty Mountains, and I think deserved victors in the end, even though they maybe got a little bit fortunate with quite how much they threw that initial engagement, given the very weird nature of the assault, but it is what it is. So big thank you to the Wound Raider for sending this one in. Big thank you to all the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. As for what's coming up soon, the next battle up is going to be a return to the Ardenheim outpost, I believe. A nice good versus evil siege that we can see. And following on from that, there are a few other replays in the backlog that I need to get to, including one in Silmarillion Total War, which will be coming out fairly soon, hopefully within the next couple of weeks or so. I've no idea at this point in time. I may have already been sent away for work again, hopefully for the last trip of the year, but you never can be sure. But yes, the rest of the year, you know, like I said, we've got enough to be getting on with for the time being, and obviously with the new patch also starting to maybe gather a bit more momentum. Anytime I get sent one of those, it will immediately get pushed to the front of the running order, so that's all to bear in mind as well. So yeah, that's my loose plan for the time being. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.